welcome to episode 362 of Stand Up with Pete Dominic Daily. I've got two amazing guests joining us today. Two-woman show. Haven't done this in a while, but I'm really happy that I did today because both these guests are awesome. Nayyera Haq joins me for the first time on the podcast. I met her when I was on the panel on HBO's Real Time with Bill Maher with her back in March of 2018. And also joining us, scholar, authoritarian, historian, and now her own Substack newsletter, which is great, Lucid. It's called Dr. Ruth Ben-Ghiat joins me as well. Nayyera Haq, Ruth Ben-Ghiat coming up in just a moment because today, no news, it's Friday, and I haven't been doing the news on the Friday to give myself just a little bit of a break. And speaking of break, I think I'm going to take off Monday from the podcast too. We'll see. That can always change. Check your feeds. If it's there, it's there. If it's not, it means I'm still working on the garden. But I can't do any of it without your support. So please sign up for a paid subscription. It would be great to see some subscriptions coming in over the weekend. It's always awesome when we welcome new people to the community. Speaking of which, we had an awesome hangout last night. There was, I think, like 40 people there. We had a lot of laughs last night, and it was great. It was very, very fun. I always enjoy my Thursdays with you, the subscribers of this show. Go to patreon.com/Pete Dominic or the paid subscription link in the show notes to see what you are missing out on every day. You'll get an email, a nature picture from another listener. You'll connect. You'll grow. We learn together on this journey. So thank you. Thank you for your support, for listening to the podcast. And shall we get started with my first guest? All right. So, like I said, I met her when we were both booked on HBO's Real Time. It's a high-pressure show. We immediately became allies on that show. And then in life, she has become a good friend and mentor of sorts to me. She has had a pretty impressive career in Washington, D.C., working in the federal government, at the White House, at the State Department, at the Treasury Department, in Congress, and a communications director on campaigns. And now she's jumped into media, where she's doing a show on Black News Channel as well as Sirius XM. She writes as a contributor for The Daily Beast. She's one of the smartest people I know, and she's funny and thoughtful and honest and so real. And I just love talking to her. I can't believe this is the first time she's been on the podcast, but I'm really happy that she joined me for this very important conversation because we don't talk about politics or foreign policy. A lot of folks have been saying, can we get away from that for a while? And I'm probably always going to have one of the two guests be topical and probably about politics some way or somehow. But today we talk with Nayyera about what it's like to be pregnant and have little kids during the pandemic. And we had a very honest, thoughtful, thought-provoking, motivational and inspiring conversation. I'm really happy that Nayyera was able to join me, and I think I'd love to make her a regular guest here on the show. I'm sure you're going to love this conversation. She is on Twitter at Nayyera, Nayyera, Nayyera. I'd love for you to say hello to her and tell her that you heard her here on the podcast, Nayyera.com. Here now, my conversation, not about politics, not about foreign policy, the things Nayyera and I usually talk about, but about what it's like to be pregnant twice during a pandemic, the second time, and give birth during the pandemic. I love this conversation. I think you will too. And after that, Ruth Ben-Ghiat coming up, a very good conversation with her. We started our conversation with me saying, I think Nayyera can sing, because she was belting a little tune. Here we go.
I actually know, because I like never... It's not like I've ever like tried out for musical theater or anything like that. It's just like shower singing and like randomly around the house. That's it.
Come on. You know if you can carry a tune. People have told you.
Oh, I can definitely carry a tune. Okay. But I'm surrounded by people who can like sing. Like the people when you go to karaoke, you're like, fuck, come on. I thought we were like having drunken fun here.
Sing some more.
What should I sing?
I don't know. Whatever you can sing.
On the Shadio. I do very well, I think, more with like caricature singing. Like I'm singing as a joke. Right.
You're actually making musicals realistic, because I always make fun of musicals. I say, I don't like musicals because people don't just break into song, but you are, in fact, in real life going back and forth.
Yes, that is. I am a walking caricature and a bit of a cartoon, yes, in my life. Where else are you going to have fun?
All right, let me start with my first official question that I actually wanted to ask you, which was I wanted to talk about your experience of becoming pregnant and having a child when you did. When did you find out you were pregnant with your second child? How old was your older?
So my older child was 3 years old, and I actually know exactly the date of conception, which was November 7th, 2019. And I know that exact date, not because I was like, oh my God, it was a mind-blowing experience. I know the exact date because it was IVF. And like, I literally watched this little embryo being popped into my uterus. I was like, oh, I'm pregnant. Thanks for this experience. Let's hope this sticks. And yeah, there was three people. There's three people involved in my pregnancy.
That's really fascinating, because I was about to say, you know, I didn't realize it was IVF, I guess. And, you know, some people can say, well, we weren't trying, like my wife and I weren't both times, or we were kind of, you know, whatever happens, or yeah, we were definitely trying. And so we were having just like appointment sex or something. But in this case, science helped. Oh,
science is the only reason, number one, I'm alive, and the only reason I have children. So big fan of science. And
why are you alive? Because of science?
I apparently have terrible birthing hips. So my first child is the reason, you know, we had an emergency C-section. And it was one of those, like, one of you is not going to survive this unless we cut you open. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Wow.
Yeah,
I remember before I even met you, I told you had terrible birthing hips before we even said anything. It was kind of rude. But
no, I mean, it's
what does that mean?
It became more my pelvis, which, you know, if you are a woman whose body is better for birthing, the magic of what a woman's body does is like the muscles and the pelvis just kind of move out of position. Right. And mine just don't really quite do that. I'm also convinced that like I would have died from some allergy to something in nature at some point when I was younger. Right. Like all of these things that because of science that I made the cut along the way, whether it was allergy medication or, you know, but like that was the moment I remember very distinctly being like, okay, I am so glad I have access to this type of healthcare. And I know and have met in the course of my work, women overseas who would wish for this access right now. And you see, if you know the numbers of infant mortality or maternal mortality in the developing world, it's pretty horrific. And we do take it for granted here. I think the women who don't take it for granted also, though, are Black women. They still have unnecessarily high infant maternal mortality rates. And that's because doctors simply just aren't paying attention the same way that my doctor was paying attention to me. So yeah, anyhow, it's like all of the stuff that I've worked on in terms of policy and, you know, putting people at the center of policy and then appreciating science. And I'm like, oh my God, like that just coalesced in that moment, which actually was election night with the Trump-Hillary election. Was my first baby. And I just like had all these like things happening. And then we went into this cocoon with a new baby for several days. And yeah, like I went into labor when Trump got elected.
Wow. I didn't know that.
That was baby one.
What does that mean? What question? I don't even know what question to ask about how that affected you emotionally. Yeah. It's supposed to be the greatest moment, and obviously there's a lot of reasons why it isn't in normal time, regardless of what's happening in the world. But in your case, you're obviously a political animal and understand the consequences of that election as well as anybody in the world. So I don't know what my question is, Nayyera, to you about that. What did that do?
There was a weird positive to it. I had been working that election. I had actually even been on a TV set doing election returns that night. Came home. We were like, all right, we're calling it. We know, you're off the hook. It's 2 a.m. And I went home and like within 2 or 3 hours, I went into labor. And so I was like processing, and I'd already been processing the rhetoric that I was hearing. And, for listeners, I'm a South Asian descended woman. Like my parents are immigrants and my husband's a Black American. And so the things that became...
She looks like Priyanka Chopra.
She's gorgeous. So I will absolutely take that. So we, as our own little family unit, birthing a family and creating one for the first time together, as the, heading into the Trump election, we're definitely feeling and experiencing and predicting a lot of the things that I think the rest of America felt in the 4 years after his election. So this was already a back of mind thing. I'm like, okay, I'm going to become a mom. I'm going to, bring a person, a new human into this world. And, maybe it won't be that world, but I definitely felt deeply it was important for me to be speaking out when I could. And that's why I was on a set within like a day or two of me needing to deliver a baby. So we go into labor. I'm like literally pacing around the bed because I was not ready to go into the hospital yet. And doctor's like, stay at home, keep walking. And I was just like, okay, so like, what does this mean? Like, do I do this? What do we do? What does this mean for our kid? Like, I literally was like cycling, like thinking through what a Trump administration could mean for our family. And then went into the hospital, had this very traumatic delivery. Our baby came out not breathing. Went to the NICU, miraculous recovery for several days. So we stayed in the hospital. And that moment of like becoming a parent and realizing this person is my responsibility was profound. It was also, I need to protect this little human. It is dependent on me. Got it. That's my new anchor and my new compass. Yep. But then it also was I got to snuggle a baby for like the first 2 to 3 months. Like, I was like, I'm not going back to work. I didn't have to figure out all this other stuff. Like, I was like, this moment is good enough. I don't need to solve the world's problems right now. I just need to solve changing this kid's diaper. Is it fed? Learning like what its moods are. Like that's I was like, and so that was a very.
How long did you continue to refer to as it?
I still do. I still do.
Have you named it?
I call it the kid. He's the kid, and like was the kid the moment he was born. He's like the kid.
And I love the way that you talk about the kids on social media and everywhere else. But so were you able to enjoy those first 3 months of motherhood, especially?
No, but I don't think I'm ever going to be
because of world events or other stuff.
I think it is I'm glad that I understood this before I went into it, but not every mother immediately bonds and falls in love with the child goo goo gaga and like instinctively wants to be like, oh, let me just do this forever. Right. So I knew I loved working and I love being engaged with people, and the way we raise babies in America, it can be very isolating because it is people don't just automatically show up. We're polite, knock on the door. Can I come visit? Which is very different than what I've experienced in Asian cultures or even African culture where it's like there's a village.
Sicilian, my wife's family Sicilian. They don't knock. They come in and they take over. It's annoying, frankly.
But it can be great with a baby because somebody is like, I'm going to do the dishes. Yeah. I'm going to feed you. Yeah. You go rest. You do. And there's a moment. So it did turn into a very personal experience for me and my husband of like how we want to be as adults going forward. But all of that identity shit was happening for me at the same time as like, I'm trying to keep a baby alive. And mind you, neither one of my kids, now I have 2, ever sleeps. I blame their dad. That's his DNA. That's fine. He deals with it, but they just don't believe in sleep. Like people be like, sleep when the baby sleeps. I'm like, what are you talking about? The kid is taking 20-minute naps. Like the kid is not sleeping.
Be honest about, give me an average 24-hour sleep cycle for your kids who are now ages of both of them. And let me go back then to take a couple steps back. But on the sleep thing, what is it really like?
Okay. So the kid now, even though we sleep trained him, he did not sleep through the night until he was a full year old. Mind you, we kicked him out of the room. We did the sleep training, but he was like, after 4 hours, it's like, hey, what's up? I'm here. I'm going to hang out. I'm just good. And you're like, oh my God. So we would literally trade off. So my husband had a lot of the night stuff because he also doesn't need sleep. And he recognized it before I did. He's like, oh, no, this is my DNA. Like, I get this. This kid is up, only needs like 5 hours of sleep and is like, I'm ready to hang. Let's do stuff. So now, even if we let our kids stay up late as a 4-year-old, if he stays up till midnight, he is still up at 6 a.m. every day, weekends included. Doesn't matter. We get zero benefit from letting him sleep, like letting him stay up late. And now the 10-month-old, which we'll talk about this pandemic baby situation, she just started sleeping through the night at 10 months.
That's hard. And it's hard because you're working as well. So
and it's hard on like, just getting yourself to figuring out what your new normal is. What I tell people about the first baby, like I had thought I could plan and had all these ideas, and like I'd talked to like a billion different people, the different scenarios, and that first baby just shatters your world apart. And so I spent the first year or two literally piecing a new world together. And it is much easier the second time around because I know what that piecing together looks like, and it wasn't as earth shattering. But between Trump and baby and physical stuff, there was just literally like, my whole world changed. And that was not, no one had talked to me about that.
I can talk to you about almost everything: foreign policy, domestic policy, politics, religion, history, race, and so much more. And I feel almost bad that this is the first time you're on the podcast and we're not talking about that. But I did seriously want to spend our time talking because you've been writing about this, and we talked about this off the air a few weeks ago about your experience. And because, as I said, we can talk about those other things, but you're just as articulate and funny and honest and vulnerable about this as you are about everything else. And so let's go back to the fact that you get pregnant November 7th, 2019. When was number 2 born?
Number 2 was born July 23rd. And we call it/her/2.0 is how we refer to her, because it was, like I said, we didn't have to start from scratch. We kind of had an idea of what we were doing. But 2.0 was born right in the middle of the pandemic, where we were not even sure if my husband would be allowed in the hospital because hospitals were limiting who could come in. So that was, and we did not know what we were going to do with the kid who was 4. I'm like, well, what do we do with him while I'm stuck in the hospital?
Do either of you have family? I feel like your parents.
I do. So we don't have family in the area. This is another one of those, like, American things. Like we both followed careers to this interesting city, met in this interesting city, and got married. And so my husband's family's in California. Mine's in New York. We're in the DC area. So we decided at that point that we were going to break the bubble. We just had to. So we broke our bubble. My elder parents quarantined, came in, they spent a week, and they ended up having this remarkable bonding experience with their grandchild, while my husband and I were literally locked in the hospital for 3 days. Like, he was like, you're coming in, and if you want to be here for the birth of your child, you are not leaving until we send the kid home with you. Mm-hmm.
Wow. Okay, so let's just talk about, though, the pregnancy itself.
Miserable.
You'd already
Absolutely
had one, so you have
horrible
perspective. But
sorry, did I say that out loud?
No, it's fine. It's good that you say things and be honest about how it was, how your experience was, because everybody has their own, I suppose. All women have their own. But the pandemic colored everything, and I haven't talked to anybody who was pregnant during it. So how did that affect your pregnancy in your life and in your whole family, your unit?
So this was a deeply wanted baby. I don't think anybody who goes through IVF is like ambivalent about having kids. So let's start with that. So the context of like me when I complain about it is like,
sure.
But there was a moment I remember I got so sick. I ended up losing so much weight, and I hospitalized twice because I couldn't keep anything down. I wasn't able to eat. And I remember being in the ER and having they took a urine sample and it was like brown, and they're like, you are not able, like, this is not okay. I'm like, I know it's not okay. I've been trying to tell you all it's not okay. And I had a woman doctor who finally was like, okay, this is not okay, but we can figure this out. And I started bawling. I'm like, thank you. Because people just really, it's so easy to say, oh, pregnancy's tough, everyone's different. I'm like, no, listen to me. This is not okay. And I remember this deeply wanted pregnancy before going on thinking, and I said, babe, I know we really want this, and I need you to remind me of that, because this is the kind of thing now I understand why abortion is healthcare, because I don't know how I'm going to get through this. It is getting very, very dark for me right now. And just having that one doctor hear me and understand that and say, okay, let's go through your day. Here's some solutions. I'm going to give you an IV at home. Like I ended up having an IV pump to just get fluids. To survive. And
when you say really dark, would you mind telling me what you mean?
Oh, I was like, I went through all of this to have this baby. And now I'm like, I don't know how I can physically survive this. Like, do I need to terminate this pregnancy so I can survive? And that's a horrible thing to have to even get to that point.
You weren't suicidal, but you thought you would want to terminate the pregnancy that you wanted so
right.
So badly.
And exactly. And it was like this. It was such a contradiction right? To be like, I want this. I've created this. We've gone through all of these extreme lengths to have this. And I don't know if I can physically survive this thing that in theory, women are supposed to do. They tell you your bodies are designed to do this. I'm like, I don't know that I can do this. And again, thank God for having access to good medical care and like having the ability to say and have somebody respond and like respond in that psychological way, not just in that biological thing. And so much of a pregnancy ends up being the biological focus and not the psychological or the social. Because that's the other thing. I wasn't seeing any of my friends at this point. Who was I socializing with? Right. It was a very isolating pregnancy. Now, on the flip side, I was totally able to fake being a normal human being online and like with some basic work stuff. And like everybody was going through their own weird pandemic isolation thing. So like, I don't feel like I lost any social capital, but I certainly missed out on that human connection and ability to, like, to have people recognize and tell you, this can be okay. We can do this together. And that's my biggest challenge with how we do everything related to maternity America. It is the extreme of pick yourself up by your bootstraps when families are about community and about building something with other people.
So well said. All of it. So well said. It's so great to be talking to you.
I'm just so glad you gave me a moment to share this, because you're right. We do. It's very, you and I are in a space where we can crack jokes, but it's like we talk about serious policy things and this and that. But like, we're living life as we're doing all of this.
Well, I would say this about you is that you don't still have the outlet or platform to do enough of this stuff. Like, your credibility and your background is so much in government and politics and policy. But when I talk to you, I learn a lot and really enjoy hearing about your life, your humor, your thoughts on everything. And the way that you explain it, especially just, talking about this. And I think it's important to mention that at least twice, if not three times, you mentioned, thank God I had good health care, which gives a perspective of if somebody else were dealing with what I was dealing with, it would have been so much worse. And it is for so many. And so it's great to talk to you about this stuff. And I will talk to you as much as you can. But let me get back to, anything else during the pregnancy. Can you talk on the record about how you dealt with your marriage and with your other child? Yeah. Anything else happened during a pandemic pregnancy that you think is important to share with folks?
I say this with full sincerity. Like, I married a unicorn. My husband,
an actual one. People, just in case you don't know, she's not
regularly.
Literally.
But my
his horn. I'm sorry. You started that, and all I could think, you did that. I didn't do that. You did that.
I absolutely put you in that position to have to respond to that. I did that to you. Yes. No lawsuits here. Don't worry.
What do you mean by unicorn? He's special. He's a good man.
He is somebody who and we do joke about this. And good thing is we kind of knew this about each other heading in. I don't think he still recognizes that he's a unicorn because he's a very humble person. But I knew that there are things that I'm really good at and things I'm bad at. And for him, he's just a very grounded, rooted person. He doesn't his brain doesn't spiral out into other directions. It's like, this is what needs to be done right now. This is what needs to be done next. And he grew up with kids in the house in a way I didn't. And so he knows and understands babies. He's also just like this crazy baby whisperer. And we would always laugh that if he can have the baby survive to a certain age, then I can take over. I can be the person who does the planning, the activities, the explaining thoughts. Like, I'm very patient with kids. But the baby's crying. I don't know what to do. The baby's not latching. Right. Like, he knows what to do. Like, he's able to soothe. So I knew that I could start a family with this person, being who I am. I knew that heading into this. And he proves that every single day. And so he, in the pandemic, was working full time. But he would come home early, leave late. Like, he would started, flexing his schedule a little bit. To make sure that I had, some kind of support. And then he would, literally he'd put his full day in the office and come home and he would take over the toddler so I could just lay out and rest. They'd go gardening, they'd go hiking. So it turned it into a really cool daddy-son bonding experience. And our marriage, we are very lucky in this. IVF was not something that hurt our marriage. It was never and I think it's our comfort with science and medicine. It was never a blame. it's your fault, my fault. Why isn't this happening? It was very, okay, this isn't working. That's not working. What resources can we use? What's next? And my husband is in the science field, so that was helpful. But so we lucked out in that we...
because what you're saying, I don't know anything about.
We never figured out why we couldn't naturally conceive. Like, we actually never figured it out.
Yeah, but what happens is there's a blame game, whether it's overt or not, on one or the other. It's your fault, it's my fault, and that creates probably a lot of... my wife and I are,
I've heard that a lot with other IVF families, and like a lot of people are like, hey, how's your marriage doing? And I'm like, I've been aware of that, and like, it's actually good. Like, there's moments where it can be very difficult, like you're pumping yourself full of hormones, you don't feel great, everybody else, it works the way it was quote unquote supposed to, and we were just very conscious about, we're doing this together, and we're going to invest in each other, and we're going to tell each other. And that's like the talking to each other about how this is challenging is the thing that reinvigorates the marriage. And that's the thing, the isolating yourself and not sharing your feelings in these moments, I think is where it can be tough. But we also, maybe we benefited from scientific inconclusivity. Like it was like, all right, it's been a year and a half. This isn't happening. Neither of us is getting younger. Doctor's like, let's just go for this. This is just as much of a reason to go fertility route as anything else. So we're like, okay, well, let's do this. That's pretty much kind of how it went down. I think it was a little harder for my husband, though, because I didn't have my first kid till I was, 36. I'm in a field where a lot of women, an industry, where a lot of women have kids later, a lot of working moms. So I felt very comfortable with the concept and been around a lot of women who'd gone through this. My husband, particularly being from a Black community and, none of his friends having kids much younger, it was newer to him of like wrestling with, oh, this is a thing that now I thought I would never have to deal with. Like he never was like... Are
you similar in age?
Yeah, he was. So he must have been 40, 38, something. I should know how old he is, but we're like 2 or 3 years apart at the time. I should also probably know our anniversary, right? Like I should know these things. I tell you,
it sounds like, he's
the guy.
It sounds like he sounds like a great guy. And you've always, talked about your marriage as being, a really healthy one. And I mean, after you describe him there, I feel like I want to run away with him.
This is my problem. Why I actually try not to share much. I'm like, someone's going to try to steal him. And I'm kind of a hot mess. And he might, I'm like, I'm the hot mess here.
I want to ride that horn. But let me just 2 minutes and you have another hit. Take the whole 2 minutes and talk to me about how it's been. How have you dealt with your postpartum pregnancy?
So, depression is a very real thing. Depression is a very real thing. Having words for it and understanding it and being in this moment where people are open and talking about it is so helpful. In many ways, this is one of the ways where I do draw on spirituality. I say, thank God I was not doing this 20 years ago. And I understand why my mom didn't share a lot of this, because I don't think she's like, you may get baby blues and you just got to kind of, barrel through it. That was it. That's the only heads up I got.
The baby blues?
That's what they used to call it in the 70s when women had to be super women, right? Like you couldn't show the world that things were cracking. No, you had to be super mom. So I do now. And I want to share this with all the women and men out there. Super mom is bullshit. No one should have to be super mom. Right? Like you should be able to be human and have flaws and be vulnerable and go through life the way everybody else does. So yeah, do I do a whole bunch of things and try to make it work every day? Sure. But that's not super mom. I want people to be able to understand that this is what we do. This is life. And the more we do this, all genders together, I think the better off we're all going to be.
Yeah, one of my favorite listeners that listens to this show pretty much every day is actually, she's now 2 years in a row, she's been okayest mom of the year. Shout out to Kim Nyborg. Okayest.
Kim, I love it. Love you already, Kim.
Mom of the year. It's such a great way of saying it, though, what you're saying, too. Another way of saying it. Well, listen, I want to get more into it, and I want to talk about the Middle East, and I want to talk about geopolitics and policy and everything else. So you tell me when you can join me next. I know you're very busy with career and obviously family. Thank you so much for talking to me today. It's so great to catch up, Nayyera.
Pete, I just want to thank you again, straight white male, as far as I know, creating space for conversations like this, for people like me and, women, people, of different ethnicities, backgrounds, religions. Like this is the type of work that is necessary in the world. And so thank you. And thank you for allowing me to be part of it.
Great to talk to you. I'll talk to you soon, I hope. All right, Nayyera Haq, everybody. Wasn't she awesome? Isn't she great? Nayyera.com and Nayyera on Twitter. I mentioned earlier what the Twitter handle is, but you can find all of Nayyera's stuff in the show notes of today's podcast. And let me know what you think, because I loved talking to her and learned a lot. And she's just so great and casual and smart and funny and a great guest on this podcast and a great friend in my life. And now another very smart person who is also a scholar. She's got a PhD. She is a contributor to CNN.com. She's written several books, including most recently Strongmen, Mussolini to the Present. Dr. Ruth Ben-Ghiat also now has an awesome newsletter called Lucid. What a great name, right? Lucid. Go subscribe right now. Go to ruthbenghiat.com to find out more and subscribe to Lucid and be a part of her awesome, awesome world. And we had a great conversation. I'm so happy to have her joining me. I should mention that she's also a professor at NYU, professor of history and Italian studies. And I'm very happy whenever she joins me. Lots to talk about with this expert on authoritarianism, fascism, and everything that's happening in America and around the world today with creeping autocracy. She is on Twitter at Ruth Ben-Ghiat, Ghiat. And here is our conversation right now. All right, here she is now, and she is one of the main, some people, they just talk and they say things and they're not that important, but your voice and your work and your scholarship is so important and accessible. I'm so happy that you're doing Lucid now, and I'm so happy that you're still not too big of a deal to join me here. Thank you for joining me again, Ruth. Great to see you.
Thank you. It's always a pleasure.
Lots happening around the world, of course, and here at home. But I want to start around the world first by just asking you, I feel like there's a lot of coups happening, but I also feel like I probably didn't pay as much attention to coups because I thought they only happened in other places. And since we have ours, which I would argue, and maybe you will too, is ongoing, that maybe I'm just noticing more. But are we seeing more power grabs around the world, or has this always been happening and I'm just paying closer attention, or we are?
No, there is an uptick in these things, and there is a kind of contagion where if one, leaders pay attention to each other, and wannabe leaders do too. And so if somebody gets away with a power grab or a kind of a severe violation of international norms, like the Belarus, in hijacking a jet to be able to arrest an opposition journalist, other people watch, and then they think the way that strongmen think. They think, oh, I can get away with that too. So military coups it's really interesting. When I did the research for my book, that was the part I didn't know as much about, was military coups. And in the 20th century, they were responsible for 75% of failures of democracy.
Wow.
Around the world. They were quite common. There was even something called the golden age of military coups, which was the Cold War era, where you had all the juntas in Latin America, but other places too. So what we saw in Myanmar recently is like a holdover from that, but they're not as common anymore, the like military coups.
But all coups are not, no coup is probably equal to another, right? And if we come back and look at what is happening in the U.S., how would you describe what has happened with the Republican Party as a result of Donald Trump's election and everything since the insurrection as an ongoing coup? What would you call it? What is it?
I mean, technically, it was a self-coup, which is when somebody who is in office and doesn't want to leave because he'd lost the election, but because of our it's not a good system where somebody gets to stay in the office for so many months after they lose. And most other countries don't have that for a reason, because you see how much trouble he made during those months. So it's a self-coup. And they exist in the past, but we came much closer to some kind of military intervention than probably people know. And it's coming out now because it wasn't just, General Michael Flynn, who was then pardoned, and the purpose he was pardoned was to be able to come back and he was trying to get a martial law declared so they could have the military rerun the election. And at that point, the military would have taken over, so that would be a coup. But Secretary of Defense Chris Miller, who was there just at the end, he said that his top 3 priorities in the last weeks before Biden came in were no foreign war, but number 2 was no military coup. So, and then, Milley's declaration saying we're not going to obey an individual, and then 10 former secretaries of defense came out, and all of these, quote, random acts, my antenna was way up.
Yeah, we just found out, too, apparently, I forget who gets the credit for reporting this, but that Liz Cheney apparently helped organize those 10, seeing as that her daddy was a former Secretary of Defense. I'm sure they're all on a text chain labeled former Sec Def. I don't know. Okay, you quoted on Twitter at Ruth Ben-Ghiat, Sarah Kendzior's tweet, which said, in all of my studies of authoritarian regimes, I've never seen a country that attempted to memory hole a coup, but that's what's been happening in the United States since January. And you just quoted it with 100%, which is, you're the scholar here. This has never happened. What does it mean to memory hole a coup, I guess? What is she saying? What are you saying?
That, it's no accident that, because Sarah studied, post-communist autocracies. And it's no accident that the two of us saw really early what was going on, and we've been able to call things for what they are, because many people don't want to use the word coup attempt. So memory hole is this was a huge optics problem January 6th for the GOP, because they're the pro-police, pro-law enforcement party, and then 140 Capitol police officers were injured and several died. So they have been on this huge crusade to shift the narrative about January 6th to either blame its violence on the left or take away the violence. And that's been a big focus of Tucker Carlson and Trump himself, who said, oh, no, the rioters, we didn't call them rioters, they were hugging and kissing the police.
The congressman that called them tourists, to which I replied with a clever tweet, Ruth. I tweeted out a photograph of Mohammed Atta walking through security on 9/11. Look like a normal traveler. Just look like a normal traveler. They just look like normal tourists. You can't take out of context that day or those people. That's crazy.
No, and the reason it's so dangerous, of course, is that if you bury the memory of the violence, it creates the conditions for violence to happen again. Right. And the history of coups shows that many successful coups were preceded by failed coups, and sometimes they weren't the same people. They were maybe slightly overlapping. Like in Chile, the famous coup in 1973 brought Pinochet to power. There was a tank coup before it that didn't work, but people study those because coup planning actually takes a long time. And it's coming out how much pre-planning there was for the rally. And the other thing I want to say that comes from the history of coups is, of course, some people have to be acting, like the people who assaulted the Capitol. But other people have to not act for a coup to work. And here we have the Pentagon that, famously waited hours to intervene, and all the other non-actions that happened. That, too, is the history of coups, because you have to stand down, because if they'd done their jobs, they wouldn't have gotten into the Capitol, and they didn't do their jobs for a reason. Yeah, it's a really important point. What is not being done? The inaction, the passivity, the looking the other way, or the actual working with, or, abiding. That's collusion. That's collusion. And that's why I say, and so many important people had to think of the scale of involvement, given the importance of our military operation, to let those people get into the Capitol and stay there for as long as they did. Well, you could have. Scary. Many people have made this point in comparison, but Lafayette Park with the Black Lives Matter movement, greeted by a whole unit of a battalion of armed people, American, versus, and how much planning and promotion was there of that? And where did it come from? By the way, it came from the grassroots. It wasn't, the Democratic nominee promoting that, obviously, versus, obviously, from Trump on down, being promoted January 6th and funded by so many people that we now know.
Why are you tweeting and talking about? You're an expert on authoritarianism and fascism and so many more issues in isms. But why are you, that expert, tweeting and talking lately about guns and how ubiquitous they're becoming in America? Why does that matter to what you know?
Because we've got two exceptional situations. You know, one of the American exceptionalism is that there are hundreds of millions of guns in private hands. And when you add that to our other situation, which is, practically uniquely American, where you have a bipartisan system, because they're not very common, a bipartisan system, where one of the two parties has abandoned democracy, and you have all these military-grade weapons in private hands. And the party abandoning democracy is also the party that wants those weapons to be in private hands. That is a recipe. That's uncharted territory because, the autocrats we know about who have consolidated power, like Putin, et cetera, they all have strict gun control laws. They're no dummies, right? And here we have something in the making that January 6th wouldn't have worked out the way it did had those people not been so well armed. So this is the big. That's why I'm tweeting about that.
Yeah, no, exactly. But yeah, I don't think I saw the point, or if you've made it, about these other autocrats, authoritarians being against having gun control. That's a fascinating point. Yeah, of course they do. And so have Americans in the past and other powerful people, of course. And this is a comment that is often, the gun people in America often talk about how Hitler, if the Jews had only had guns and all that, that's a diatribe that we've heard before. You say abandon democracy, and you've also said just now, the American democracy, Republicans are turning to autocracy. I agree with you. Who am I to even say that? But could you just flesh that out a little bit? How are Republicans turning to autocracy or demanding democracy? Just, you've written about this extensively. You've talked about it a lot, but just a couple points on it, if you could, about where we're at now.
Yeah. So just make one point about how we got to where we are now, that the Republican Party went, and Trump was like, see, what happens in history is you have parties already moving in this direction, extremists, et cetera. And then somebody comes along who gives focus and momentum. So Trump did a couple of key things. One was that he made it legitimate to consider the political opposition as an enemy, so that it wasn't just about having difference of opinion between Republican and Democrat anymore. It was that the Democrat had to be locked up. That's Hillary Clinton. And journalists had to be locked up. And then what he's done...
pretty much everybody.
Well, yeah. And then criminalizing protesters. They're going to be locked up.
Yep.
And we'll get...
I'll pay for your bills if you beat the hell out of them. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. And then the other thing that's happened...
He would never have.
Is he's imposed this authoritarian style party discipline inside the GOP. So that people who voted to, Republican congressmen who voted to impeach him in February had to buy body armor because they were getting death threats. And there's a huge story that's underreported about the magnitude of death threats to Republicans by other Republicans. That's partly how we got where we are. And so some of what's going on now at all this slew of state legislation, some of it is right in with GOP history, like voter suppression on, primarily racial grounds, racist grounds. But if you take it all together, the anti-trans legislation, the criminalization of protest and making people immune from criminal penalties if they run over protesters, and of course, the redistricting and trying to have people not vote, all of that's from the menu of today's autocracy, because people come in today through elections and they have to manipulate elections to stay there. So that's the direction we're going in.
Yeah. And before we get to what they're doing in Russia and Belarus, two protesters and journalists covering those protests and outlawing protests, we're seeing a lot of that happen. But I want to just stay in America for another minute or two, which is to talk about the January 6th Commission. You talk about this memory hole, and we look back at other commissions, 9/11 Commission, Tower Commission on Iran-Contra, of course, Watergate. But why is it so important that there be an investigation? And what do you say about those Republicans in the Senate or in the House that vote against it. I mean, 35 Republicans in the House voted for it. And then you could look at impeachment just to see who's going to probably vote for a commission. But we've already got, I think, a couple of Republicans who say vote for it. But nothing could be a more important thing to investigate. Why is it so important to investigate? And why do these Republicans not want to do it?
Well, they don't want to do it because they're criminals. It was a criminal act.
Yeah.
I mean, January 6th was a criminal act.
Yes.
In myriad ways.
Yes.
And
a lot of crimes were broken.
Yeah. And so the criminals never want to be investigated. And that's been Trump's thing, he's always been breaking the law. And so that's why all autocratic individuals go after anybody who can investigate them. They go after prosecutors, they go after journalists, they attack people to try and silence them. And then when you get to, a real regime like a Putin, they fall out of windows, they get poisoned and all these other things. But of course, they don't want anybody to investigate because 57, I will never get over this, 57 GOP officials at the local and state levels participated in January 6th. As well as we also know about the same number of active duty or retired law enforcement and military, et cetera. But if we keep to the GOP, when 57 people participated in it and they're officials of the party, of course they don't want to have it.
Just a caveat there. What do you think about me and others saying, well, yeah, of course they did. They believed the election was stolen because their leader, the president of the United States, was telling them that for months before it happened, when it happened, quote, when it happened, and after. Do you have a sympathy for those GOP officials or anybody else who participated thinking their vote was stolen?
No, not at all, because although there are people who are, I would say, non-officials, like the public, who were hoodwinked and bamboozled and really do think that Trump won the election. Yeah. GOP officials are not among them. They know perfectly well who won the election.
That's a good point about the splitting hairs between the officials and the rubes that were just radicalized on YouTube.
Yeah. They're just going along with the lie because that's part of corruption. That's why I wrote so much about corruption. Doesn't have to be financial corruption. It can be a kind of moral corruption where you go along with lies, with violence, because it meets your political goals. And their political goal is to keep power at any cost. So they can't be investigated. And also they know exactly how impactful it's going to be to have witnesses, to have it televised, and they're going to lose support.
It is true. The political consequences there can be no doubt that there will be consequences for Republicans that will mostly hurt them in many ways, and just keeping it on the forefront of people's minds. But by the way, that's Republicans wrote the playbook on that because they investigated shit that wasn't happening, like Benghazi, and then they admitted it actually hurt. Remember, Kevin McCarthy admitted it actually hurt Hillary Clinton's chances, and that's what it's about. So two things can be also true. An investigation could have political consequences, but it doesn't mean you don't do an investigation on a murder or on what happened on January 6th. That is government's role to investigate actual things that happen.
But that's if you have a democratic framework. If you are already in it's really hard for people to accept this because it's scary, but they're no longer they're not playing a democratic game anymore. So all the rules, all the norms, including that, yes, you should have a bipartisan investigation, that doesn't count for them anymore. They're in a Donald Trump liberated them into lawlessness, and they are in a different mindset, different values now. And so all of these common sense things or things we did in the past don't count anymore for them.
Like cheating to win elections was something that most Americans agreed was wrong, not liberals or conservatives. Cheating in general, most Americans, we learned that in preschool, I thought, but now that's being referred to as somehow a liberal value. No, it's cheating. Cheating is bad no matter who does it.
And they've been phenomenally successful in moving the political culture and then indoctrinating millions and millions of Americans with constant, with repetition of lies. And Trump was a one-man factory of lies. He was extremely successful propagandist.
What do you think about he was so effective and still is, even without a mouthpiece, a megaphone, which is super important, I think, and impactful. But what do you think about, you've also been tweeting about Marjorie Taylor Greene. A lot of people are saying she's picking up the ball and Trump ball and running with it. And don't look away, because as crazy as she is, she matters a great deal. You're also saying on Twitter, don't share the things that she said. That's a bad idea, which I fully agree with. I don't mention the names of mass killers or terrible people who do terrible things either, for the same reason. But what do you make of Marjorie Taylor Greene's rise to power, and now even getting reprimanded by crazy Republican colleagues of hers for her comparison between masks and the Holocaust? I don't know that really even matters, but nonetheless, what about her? What do we need to know?
So it's very dangerous when extremists get normalized and they become elected officials. And I saw this in Italy when Berlusconi brought the former neo-fascists into the government. You had these people who used to be ridiculed. They were total fringe, and now they're sitting in the Senate. So when this happens, this is part of the shift of political culture. So now somebody like Marjorie Taylor Greene, who espouses conspiracy theories and entertainment politics, and she occupies a lot of media attention and thus becomes more of a mainstream figure. That's the danger. And so the reason I think we cannot retweet her is that that's not only what she wants, but social media rewards engagement. And Trump knew that very well. And every time we retweet, the algorithms don't know why we're retweeting. They just know that this is popular.
Yeah, I saw you're sharing our friend Clint Watt's tweet about what social media is doing to you. And if we've learned, we sometimes forget. So it's always a good reminder. Let me ask you the same question the great Mehdi Hassan asked, the hypothetical about a 2024 Republican-controlled Congress. Would they certify an election if Joe Biden or somebody else runs as a Democrat and wins? Would the House, if it was majority Republican, would they certify that Democrat's election?
No, they would try not to. And what they're doing now, part of this busy activity of purging the party, not just Liz Cheney, but at the state level, they want to make sure.
In Nevada, I was just reading about what they're doing to Nevada Republicans, who are already, in my mind, crazy, are being pushed out by the even crazier. And they're going, these people are nuts. And it's like, you made them. I'm sorry.
No, Nevada, before Trump came on the scene, I had been writing already for CNN, and I was writing about guns and gun violence. And I did research, or maybe even did a piece, I don't remember, on this state representative in Nevada whose Christmas card was her and her family all posing with machine guns, with automatic weapons. And what this said about the quality of people there. So Nevada has always been like a hot spot of this. You're
still, thoughtful and scholarly when you say what that says about the quality of people there. Nevada politician Michelle Fiore is her name. I'm trying to see.
Her. That's her. I was going back to look at my pieces I was doing before Trump came on the scene, and a lot of them were about guns. Some of them were never published. Nobody wanted them, but CNN did a few of them. But what they're doing now, the GOP, is they want to make sure they never have a Brad Raffensperger again. Never have that problem again.
A person who looks at data and is honest about it, of the outcome of an election.
They don't want people to do the right thing, which is for them the wrong thing. They need criminals. And because it is a criminal act to be falsifying. And I really want to keep calling them criminals because that's what they are. There are many different kinds of crime out there. So they are purging, and this is what Erdogan does in Turkey. Anything to do with elections, you have to make sure you have loyalists on board in those positions. And then when the time comes, and they may try and do the whole elector thing, handpick electors. And so the Electoral College, that many people for ages wanted to get rid of it because it's against direct democracy. But from my point of view, studying people who threaten, the fewer people you have deciding a momentous event like the American presidency, the more those people are vulnerable to death threats and can be manipulated. If you think, unfortunately, writing Strongmen, I had to get in the heads of these guys for 2 years. So that's how they think. So the Electoral College isn't just unfair, it's dangerous.
Very good point. And before I end, I want to just mention the great work you're doing with Lucid, which has a lot of different features, but you're also interviewing a lot of experts yourself. I love to ask you questions. I always learn a lot from reading you and from talking to you, but you've been interviewing some really smart people, including people like Jay Rosen and Nayyera Haq and many, many more. And you're off to a great start, and everybody should subscribe right now to Lucid. All the links are in the show notes. If you're listening out on a walk, don't stop. You can just look it up in the show notes. It's linked there. Pick somebody that you've talked to, that you've learned something from, and share that with us. I should have sent you this ahead of time so you could think about it, but I don't fear that you will come up with something good.
The interview I published this week with Nayyera Haq, who's an economist, and it's called The Lonely Century. And I was really blown away when I read her book, because it's about not just the costs of loneliness, and she started writing it before the pandemic, that we know about, where people can have mental health issues, but the political costs too. And she made these points about, she approached the whole subject of like populism and Donald Trump, and others saying, I love you and you're special, but how loneliness can make people more vulnerable to the promises of these strongmen type, and they can be a woman too, like Marine Le Pen in France, and the right's been much better at making communities, at giving people rituals and chants and making them want to come together. So that I found, it was a really thought-provoking interview for me.
I love Nayyera. She used to join me on the SiriusXM show a lot, and I didn't know until that she'd written a book, until I read that you interviewed her for Lucid. So that's great. I'll definitely have to get her on. I just want to ask you one more question about just what's happening in the rest of the world. What do you say about this hijacking of a commercial of a passenger jet, an Irish airline, between two European Union airports, and the strongman in Belarus, Lukashenko, hijacks it in an elaborate plan that Hollywood screenwriters might be like, it's too much, wouldn't happen. What do you think are one or two good points to draw from what's happening there and anywhere else?
So I had already written a little paragraph about him in another essay, because he is an example. He's on the defensive. He's a real despot. He last year, despite COVID, there were mass protests in Belarus because he fabricated election results so he didn't have to leave power. And he did this whole political theater thing where he like took off in a helicopter and he buzzed the crowd of protesters. They were marching on his presidential palace. And then he landed and he had body armor and he had like an AK-47 and all this, like, it was perfect, for the virility, the violence. Yeah. It was exactly the strongman thing. So that's who this is. That's the personality. But he is on the defensive because these were the largest mass protests. And this journalist in exile he was organizing them. And that's how he got to be a target. So the strongmen do desperate things, and they don't care what kind of international or national laws they break when they're desperate. And this was an example of that. It was very audacious, and they test the boundaries. So it's really important that the EU strike back at him, and some UK has banned Belarus flights and all of that, because other autocrats are watching to see what's going on.
What's his name again, the journalist? I wish I had mentioned his name. Roman Protasevich. Yeah. Look him up if you haven't heard about that story yet. But finally, what does it mean when they and other countries, and I guess some states coming back to it, as I'm glad I remembered it did, outlaw protest? What is that a sign of? Where is that happening? And how is it starting to happen in America?
You use the law in creative ways to, do you define it as a protest or a riot. As soon as you define it as a riot, then you can say that the protesters are terrorists. And so Putin has been very, creative in trying to find ways to arrest protesters. And so what's going on now, where it's West Virginia in 2018 had already passed a law that said you could basically, if you run down a protester in a car, you don't have any penalty. And so this goes very well with the violence. You're allowed to be violent against them. So it's very scary.
It's like not unlike stand your ground laws to some extent. It's similar. It's this idea.
Yeah. Yes, exactly. So it's not a good development.
I appreciate you joining me. Lucid has been great. I'm so happy that you're doing this project and that you're interviewing other experts. It's great. I've learned so much. Like I said at the beginning and at the end, your voice is super important. And I'm so happy that you're continuing to do excellent work. Thank you so much for joining me today.
Thank you.
And there you have it, Dr. Ruth Ben-Ghiat. Ruth Ben-Ghiat on Twitter. Subscribe to lucid.substack.com. Lucid.substack.com right now. Let her know you heard her here on Stand Up. So great to have the conversation with her today. I learned so much and really important stuff from both Ruth and Nayyera Haq. And that is the Friday show. I'm taking Monday off. I hope you have an awesome Memorial Day weekend. Thank you very much for listening to the podcast. Please tell your friends, give a review on Apple Podcast and 5 stars and all of that jazz. And send me an email anytime, standupwithpete@gmail.com. Subscribe at patreon.com/Pete Dominic with a paid subscription. I love you. You're not alone if you're a stand-up community member. You can always hang out with us on the Discord chat. And here now, singer-songwriter, Grammy Award winner, our own John Carroll with a song he wrote just for us. Stand Up. Take it away, Johnny.
Don't get up off of your butt, get down off of your fence. Even if it ain't a very friendly audience, well, they'll begin to listen when you start making sense. And you stand up, stand up. No need to point your rifle to defend your town. Just stand up, stand up. You know they can't deny you what you're laying down. Boy, you better stand up, stand up. Show your face of every color, yellow, black, red, and brown. She's the place where every lost child will finally be found. There's only one thing to do before we stand our ground, and that's stand up, stand up. Well, the founding fathers saw the land for all. They had to stand up, they had to stand up. They had a keen imagination for a crystal ball, drawing all the plans of stand up. But all they had to go on was the time they were in, with other causes for laws, and since they weren't even sin, they knew that change was gonna come before the change could begin. They had to stand up. All right, they had to stand up. We got to stand up. We got to look the devil square in the eye. We gotta let him know it's his time to go, and make it clear when all we hear is a lie. Why you lying awake wondering where the money all went? It'll be the cost of freedom that'll go unspent. You can see him flee the scene of that experiment if you stand up. Alright, we got to speak up, we got to reach up and raise your voice in every way you know how. Don't be toes up, you got to show up. Ain't no better time to do it but now. No need to pledge allegiance to no wanton tribe. Rise up, show obedience to the voice inside, and listen well and it'll tell you not to run and